The conference room smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper. I could hear the legal pads breathing as pages were turned, the way dry leaves whisper. When the associate cleared her throat, my son was faster than her. Caleb leaned forward, elbows hard on the table, and said, "Dad is not well enough to make sense of this." His voice did not tremble. Mine did, but not where anyone could see. I placed both hands on the wood. The ring Marina chose for me cool against the gloss, and waited for the lawyer to continue. The additional schedule to Marina's trust was thinner than I expected and heavier than it looked. Numbers will do that. Wait a room without moving. 48 million. I watched the lawyer's mouth form the words, watched Lena's eyes sharpen as if she were photographing the syllables. The associate kept saying, "per the decedent's intent," a phrase that felt too clean for a woman who laughed with her whole shoulders and always left 3 blueberries on the counter for the birds. "I'm petitioning the court for a temporary guardianship," Caleb announced to the heir, as if the heir were a clerk. He had chosen a new shirt for the day, stiff, uncreased, and the collar bit his neck each time he rose in volume. "Dad isn't thinking straight." I did not answer. The lawyer shifted to the final page and asked if I would acknowledge receipt. I reached for the pen, and as I did, my wrist brushed my inner pocket. Metal tapped bone. I remembered. The small brass key waited in the lining of my vest, stamped with CK-27. Marina's habit. She never left me without a breadcrumb. The meeting ended the way weather clears. No apology, just absence. I walked to the elevator alone. When the door shut, I slid my fingers around the key, then found the envelope Marina had placed with it months before. She'd sealed it with a dark blue wax I'd last seen at our anniversary dinner, a color that could make you hear the sea. On the front, in her steady architectural hand, "Open when cornered." By the time I reached the lobby, my phone blinked a single voicemail transcription from an unknown number. 4 words. "Go to Cedar Keep Lodge." The rest of the screen was quiet. Home no longer smelled like oranges and library glue. The lock turned twice and refused me. My key, the one with scratches from the day we moved in, found only a polite stop. The stoop felt wider than usual. I could see the new deadbolt. They had installed it while I was at the reading. I stood with the habit of knocking in my hand, and then I put that hand away. I did not bang, did not raise my voice. I took the next step that was already waiting for me. At the airport hotel, you learn that privacy can be a hallway. I changed the passwords to our joint email accounts, then to my personal banking, then to the brokerage, then to the cloud storage where Marina kept recipes and, discreetly, scans of everything that ever mattered. I set 2-factor authentication where I had been lazy. I drank water slowly. When the room quieted, I pulled the blue wax envelope to me and warmed the seal with my palm before breaking it cleanly. Inside, 3 items and an instruction. A contact card in Marina's tidy block letters. Maya Thorne, Estate Counsel, independent of the bank. A copy of a page titled Amended Trust, Schedule B, Summary. And a bank safe deposit receipt that was older than I remembered, its date circled twice. Her instruction read like her. Simple, exact. Call Maya. Do not argue. Keep moving. When I called, Maya answered as if we'd been in the same room all afternoon. "Thomas, I'm glad you have the envelope. We do the first 72 hours quietly and carefully. Tonight, relocate. Change anything with a password. List every document in your possession. Tomorrow, we freeze discretionary credit lines and revoke any power of attorney instruments that are out of date. We document everything. You do not respond to provocation. There is a kind of mercy in being given a list. I slept with the lamp on and the brass key under my palm. Small how-to, learned the hard way. In the first 24 to 72 hours after a family financial shock, secure your accounts, your physical documents, and your sleep. Write down what you change. Tell one independent professional and one trusted neighbor. Tell no one else. This is not legal advice. Consult a local professional. Mourning makes rooms honest. I left before dawn for the airport and bought the first ticket to Portland's smaller cousin in the mountains. Cedar Keep Lodge was 2 hours up, tucked among firs that made the road exhale. CK-27, I guess, was not a code, but a drawer. The lodge issued a key with a brass twin to my own. Someone had called ahead, or the world had lined itself as Marina intended. In the office, the manager handed me a small cedar box with a polite gravity she reserved for hymnals. The box smelled like a dresser on the day it is open for grandchildren. Inside, I found a letter of instruction, typed and signed in the unfussy way Marina preferred. A list of names, including Maya's and another. Jared Sinclair, senior client officer at our bank. A sentence that said, "If you are reading this, Thomas, it is because I expect you to do what is difficult without raising your voice." Folded under the letter was a second envelope, this one addressed to Ava, our granddaughter, sealed with a lighter wax, and no instruction at all. I did not open it. Jared shook my hand the way men do when they have seen too many spreadsheets to be impressed by anything except a quiet plan. In his office, he reviewed the accounts, set temporary restrictions on credit lines that had fed more convenience than need, and placed fraud alerts that would ring if a pattern diverged from our long habits. He scheduled a forensic review of the last 6 months of transactions, a word that feels like a cold room and a light too bright. It is also a way to tell truth from story. Maya met me at the lodge with a yellow legal pad, boots that did not apologize for the weather, and a temper she kept sheathed. We file a notice revoking prior powers of attorney this afternoon, she said, and we prepare to lodge the amended trust with the county. We also gather testimony about your capacity. Simple, factual, dated. She slid a blank affidavit toward me, then another with a header already filled. Mrs. Whitaker, our neighbor of 22 years. I could hear the sound of her yard rake in my memory. When I called Mrs. Whitaker, she answered on the first ring, as if her phone had been curled in her palm all morning. I saw them change the lock, she said, voice soft with worry. I wrote the time down, just in case. She would sign the affidavit in her careful schoolteacher script. Timelines, like fences, work best when straight. The box of documents grew heavier with smaller things. The safe deposit receipt with its double-circled date, the clipped copy of the amended trust page, a scanned email from Marina to herself, saved to the cloud, listing account nicknames and the logic of each designation. I wrote a simple ledger of what I had, what I lacked, and what I would not discuss outside my circle. That night, under the firs, the lodge windows were cordial rectangles of light. I held the brass key in my palm. until the warmth of it felt like promise rather than fear. Small how-to for when a storm arrives. Make a written inventory of your documents and contacts. Freeze what is not necessary to live for 30 days. If you must speak, speak to the bank and to the attorney, not to the comment section, not to the cousin who loves a crowd. This is not legal advice. Consult a local professional. News moved faster than decency. By the third day, a hashtag with my surname was already learning to walk. Lena posted a photograph of our mailbox with a caption about protecting Dad's legacy and a donation link to a foundation I had never heard of, the kind that uses the word family to hide the absence of paperwork. Maya took screenshots, each labeled with date and time. "We will not engage," she said, and her calm was a room I walked into. We filed the revocation of prior powers of attorney, then the new healthcare proxy that named 2 alternates who did not share my last name. The county clerk stamped with a sound that always reminds me of carpenters, the thunk of things aligned. Maya prepared our package to lodge the amended trust, schedules, letters, the notarized statements of capacity from my primary physician and from Mrs. Whitaker, who wrote plainly and did not attempt poetry. "Mr. Arden jogs every morning with a yellow hat," she wrote, "and explained to me the difference between a will and a trust, while I watered the hydrangeas. At the bank, Jared reduced authorized user limits to 0 and changed the rules. 2 signatures for any discretionary transfer, including mine." "You're asking me to slow you down," he said, almost smiling. "It's a good sign." The forensic review began, a quiet algorithm paired with human attention. Jared marked 3 items for early scrutiny. A series of roundups to a fundraising platform that did not list a federal identification number, a wire request that had been initiated but not confirmed, and a new credit card, overnighted to an address unfamiliar to our file. I asked for a room for a conversation and chose the public library. Neutral air. The librarian who set us up wrote our last names on a whiteboard and smiled in a way that told me she had seen many families try to remember their gentleness. I arrived 10 minutes early, placed a blue wax envelope on the table like a small chapel, and waited without scrolling. Caleb walked in, with his shoulders high and his jaw tight. Lena followed with a phone already recording the table's edge. I did not scold. I did not mention the new lock. I read from Marina's letter, the one inside the cedar box, the part where she explained, almost cheerful, why a portion of the assets would bypass their generation to land, carefully with a granddaughter who still said please to strangers. I explained the amended trust, its conditions, its safeguards, its timelines that protect us from our worst week. "From now on," I said, keeping my voice low enough to require attention, "communication about money will go through Maya. Family will go through me. There will be no posts, no campaigns, no links. If there is a rumor, we will answer with paper." Lena lifted the phone higher, and Maya, who had waited by the reference desk, stepped into the room. "I'm counsel," she said pleasantly, and placed a 1-page statement on the table. It described in polite sentences exactly how we would proceed and exactly how we would not. "If harassment continues," she added, still pleasant, "we will seek relief." Her meaning was a restraining order without the drama of the word. Caleb did not shout. He set his hands on the table and leaned closer to read Marina's handwriting. And the boy I knew, the one who drew rockets on napkins and believed you could return home from any trajectory, looked up at me as if for a landing path. "You're really going to freeze everything?" he asked. Small. "For a while," I said, "so that what is true can be found." Outside, the afternoon held its position. We walked to our cars like neighbors leaving a town meeting, everyone touching their pockets for keys, for assurance. Back at the lodge, I sat at the cedar box and placed the brass key beside the envelope addressed to Ava. You can measure a life by what you leave for, the ones who must decide who they will be. The court date arrived on a piece of paper that crinkled like winter. 3 weeks. Caleb's petition for temporary guardianship would be heard on a Tuesday morning so early the hallways would still be settling their lights. Maya lined our evidence like careful stones. The affidavits, the physician's letter, the bank's interim report, the timing of the changed lock, the screenshots, not to embarrass, but to draw a line between claim and fact. She reminded me that we do not win with thunder. We win with the weather report. In the week before the hearing, Jared's preliminary forensic notes found patterns that did not survive daylight. Micro donations that accumulated in a separate account under a name cousin to ours. A checkout attempt for a luxury watch never completed because the address verification did not match. A temporary card sent to a co-working space's mail slot. Jared's face, when he explained it, was not angry. It was careful, which is what you want in a man touching your life with a calculator. At night, when the lodge hallways sounded like radio static and the firs made a roof of their own, I thought about Marina at her drafting table. She used to say, "People think boundaries are fences. They're actually railings on stairs." She would draw a line and then show me how it became a safe place to hold while you went down into the unfamiliar. I held the brass key again, thumb resting in the little notch where years had taught it to welcome me. The day before the hearing, I met Ava for tea in the Lodge Cafe, a place that smelled like orange peel and new paper cups. I did not give her the envelope yet. I asked about her classes and her friends and the book she was reading. She asked about her father, and I did not lie. "He's scared," I said. "And when people are scared, they make noise. I'm making quiet." She smiled, a crooked mouth she got from Marina's side, and reached across the table, palm up. I placed the brass key in it, just for a moment, then took it back. "Soon," I said, "when it's time. Small, how-to. When the room heats. Pick a neutral place for hard conversations. Bring paper, not accusations. Name one channel for communication and close the others. Document harassment without replying to it. This is not legal advice. Consult a local professional." On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse smelled like dust, deciding whether to be sunlight. I carried a slim folder, not because it was enough to win a case, but because it was the right size for courage. Inside were the pieces of paper that had become my railing. Mrs. Whitaker's affidavit with its patient loops, my physician's statement written in the concise language of a man who counts breaths for a living. The interim forensic report flagged with 3 pale tabs and a simple timeline, beginning with a changed lock and ending with a library table. Maya stood beside me without speaking. She has the calm of a harbor. Boats come in loud and leave quiet. When the clerk called our case, the room took a collective breath. Caleb sat at the opposite table, his tie pulled too tight. Lena whispering into a phone that did not need more to carry. The judge looked at me the way a carpenter looks at a beam, checking for stress lines. He asked 3 questions. I answered with dates and verbs. When Caleb's counsel suggested I did not understand the complexity of the assets, I smiled the way an old teacher does when a student forgets the first chapter. That's why the trust is amended, I said gently, to make complexity safe. Maya kept her hand on the legal pad and drew a square around the word capacity. We did not object much. We let the paper stand. If truth is properly stacked, it can carry weight without anyone shouting. When Mrs. Whitaker read her statement, her voice was a library hour, steady, free to the public. She mentioned the yellow hat and the hydrangeas. The judge looked at the hat on my lap and let his mouth consider a smile he did not choose. The decision was not a flourish. It was a sentence that landed where gravity required. The petition for the temporary guardianship was denied. The court accepted the lodging of the amended trust. The judge instructed the parties to refrain from public comment and to allow the bank's forensic review to conclude without interference. He did not bang the gavel. He set it down. Outside, the courthouse steps were just concrete again. Maya exhaled, then folded our copy of the order and slid it into my folder as if it were the final photograph in a family album. We keep following the plan, she said. The quiet does the rest. Small how-to for days that need a spine. Bring a clean timeline, notarized statements from people who have watched you live, and confirmations from professionals who aren't related to you. Answer questions with dates, not adjectives. Let the documents be louder than you are. This is not legal advice. Consult a local professional. Back at the bank, Jared closed his door and placed the forensic report on the table like an X-ray. Here's the pattern, he said. Micro-donation stacking to a private account with a name cousin to ours. A wire initiated but never confirmed. A card issued to a workspace with mail slots instead of names. There were no villains in his tone. Only his systems doing their job when asked. He outlined the next steps. Clawback procedures where possible. Fraud alerts elevated. Authorized user privileges reduced to 0, with a notation requiring co-signature for any discretionary transfer. He drafted 3 letters, one to the platform holding the donations, one to the credit issuer regarding the misdirected card, and one to our records, noting that public fundraising in our family's name must be authorized by the trustee in writing. I read each letter like a man learning to walk a different hallway. It is surprising how much kindness lives in the phrase paper trail. That afternoon, I wrote to the public library. Marina had loved the smell of the stacks and the way children treat a card as if it were a passport. Through the new family foundation, quietly registered and properly documented, we sent a grant of $50,000 for a senior's reading room with chairs that do not punish backs, that have carried decades. I asked them to place one small brass plaque near the window. For the ones who choose quiet, in honor of Marina. Caleb received a copy of the court order and later the bank's letters. He did not call. He sent an email that began with Dad, and then detoured into pride and fear and the way time makes boys into men before anyone teaches them how to lower their shoulders. He ended with something that sounded like surrender but shaped itself like care. I went too far. I did not write back at once. I sat beneath the firs at Cedar Keep Lodge and rolled the brass key, CK27, between my fingers until the edges softened the day. Then I wrote 3 lines. I told him the door was a boundary, not a punishment. I told him the foundation would accept his volunteer hours if he wanted to earn back trust by walking it. And I told him I loved him with the kind of love that requires we both become better. Small how-to when repair begins. Offer a path with milestones and end dates. Tie apology to action and action to verification. Keep the tasks simple and useful. Allow dignity entry, but do not let it write checks. This is not legal advice. Consult a local professional. I met Ava on a Saturday that smelled like oranges, though none were nearby. She was wearing a sweater with sleeves that kept nearly everything. We sat at a corner table and spoke of school and the book that had kept her awake past good sense. Then I placed the cedar box between us. I lifted the lid and set the blue wax envelope addressed to her on the table as if it might sing. "This is from your grandmother," I said. "I haven't opened it." She ran one finger along the edge and then looked at me, waiting for permission that was already hers. Letters, like promises, belong to those for whom they are written. She broke the seal carefully. Inside was a page in Marina's hand, angled and precise. Ava read silently, then aloud, because some words earn air. Marina had left her a sketch of future work, a scholarship to design safe stairwells for public buildings, a summer job cataloging light in photographs, a note about how kindness with boundaries grows taller than kindness without them. There was a small drawing of a handrail. Ava covered her face for a moment, not to hide, but to hold. When she lowered her hands, she looked older in the way good news can age you into who you are. I placed a brass key in her palm and folded her fingers around it. "CK27, I said. "Cedar Keep, Box 27. It's yours now. Not because of money, because of trust." That evening, I drafted a 1-page statement I called the Quiet Declaration. It did not accuse. It did not boast. It simply named the rules by which our family would move forward. We would not litigate our lives in public. We would place railings where stairs were steep. We would ask professionals to steward what our hearts were, too full to hold with precision. We would leave room for return. I printed the page on thick paper with a soft edge and placed it in the cedar box. Some families passed down recipes, others a way of speaking. We would pass down a way of stopping before the cliff and building the guardrail we needed. At Cedar Keep, we held a small remembrance for Marina. Not a service that made people remember their shoes. A few neighbors, a librarian who cried quietly when we told her about the grant, Mrs. Whitaker with a plate of lemon bars, Ava with the envelope folded into her pocket like a compass. We placed a candle in front of a window that held the furs without stealing from them. Caleb arrived late and stood at the back. I did not call him forward. When the candle had burned to a dignified stub, he stepped to the table and whispered, "I'll do the hours." Sometimes remorse needs no microphone. We signed a family agreement in the lodge's lounge where the furniture forgave us for being heavier than when we were young. It said precisely what would not happen again. No unauthorized access, no fundraising without papers, no posts that turned private grief into public sport. It said precisely what would. The bank's review would conclude. The trust would operate as amended. The foundation would serve without fanfare, and anyone who wished to return to the circle could do so by stepping onto the path and walking it to the end. Small, how-to, for finishing what hurt well. Write the agreement when tempers are low and caffeine is honest. Use short sentences. Name behaviors, not feelings. Add one clause about how to revise the paper when you become wiser. This is not legal advice. Consult a local professional. The last night at Cedar Keep, I walked the hallway with the brass key in my pocket and listened to the lodge settle. Floors talk when they've carried a day. I thought of Marina's letter of instruction and the ridiculous mercy of a woman who plans for storms and still buys 3 blueberries for birds. If I could speak to her across the polite distance between worlds, I would say, the plan worked. Not because it punished, because it protected. In the morning, the road home felt like an honest sentence with no commas where drama might hide. When I reached our house, the lock turned once and then twice. Not because I had forced it, but because we had agreed on who keeps keys. Inside, the air remembered oranges again. On the kitchen table, I placed the quiet declaration beside a small set of tools. A pen, a notary's card, a second key with CK27 engraved for when Ava forgets and then remembers. I brewed coffee and opened the window 1 inch, the way Marina always said, let a room breathe after it has held its breath too long. I sent a copy of the grant agreement to the library, a thank you note to Mrs. Whitaker that said what thanks can never finish, and an email to Jared confirming the final steps of the clawback and the update to our account notations. I sent a message to Maya with a single line. We did not shout. She replied, and yet we were heard. I do not know what Caleb will become in the exact hours ahead, but I know this. Love without boundaries is noise, and noise cannot carry meaning far. Love with boundaries is a bell that tells you where home is. When Ava visits next, we will walk to the library and sit in chairs that give dignity to backs like mine. She will show me Marina's letter again, as if the ink might rearrange itself into new wisdom. I will remind her that the brass key is only a symbol. The real key is a habit, to choose quiet power when loud fear takes the stage. The doorbell rang once, no pounding, just the ordinary civility of a person who knows he is both son and student. I picked up the quiet declaration and opened the door. Comment CTA. What would your own quiet declaration include? One boundary you would put in writing to protect dignity and repair.